History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 597th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to be checking out Frederic Remington and the Museum of Art that is dedicated to him. And of course, Remington came up in our previous episode about Haunted Tulsa, where we heard the story about that police officer who, I guess, saw a ghost that told him, hey, if you look at that picture long enough, you'll see a hidden rabbit, because there's always hidden rabbits in Remington's art. And so we were like, I wonder if Frederic Remington is a ghost. And we went ahead and checked that out. And sure enough, he does haunt this museum, supposedly. I do have to say, when we tried to find out if there really were rabbits hidden in his art, we haven't found any substantiation for that. So we're not sure if that ghost was just pulling a leg.
A lucky rabbit's foot, maybe?
Or maybe knows something that the rest of the world doesn't know. We need to get out our book on Frederic Remington, where we have a bunch of his artwork in there, and see if we find anything.
Yeah, we definitely need to get on that.
Before we get into telling you about the history and haunts of this museum and talk about the man himself, we want to welcome into the Spooktacular crew, Linda, Regina, and Beth.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook group.
And now, this moment in oddity.
Although Diane and I love all critters, we also eat them, and one mention of crab makes our mouths start to water. We do not have the opportunity to enjoy crab often, but there is a species of crab where just one single crab would feed us for several meals. This is the Japanese spider crab, which is found off the waters of Japan in depths of 50 to 300 meters. The species only moves to shallower waters during the breeding season. They are scavengers by nature and can live between 50 and 100 years. These crabs are known as decorator crabs. They attach various sponges, algae, and other items to their bodies to aid in camouflage to help avoid predation. The Japanese spider crab is a slow-moving creature. However, happening upon one of these crabs could also elicit nightmares. The tasty delicacy has a carapace that can measure up to 16 inches across, and their leg spans can measure up to 12.5 feet, making the Japanese spider crab the largest arthropod on Earth. And their size certainly makes them odd.
Are you afraid of the dark? That's just silly. What you should be afraid of is the thing that watches you sleep.
And now this month in history.
In the month of July in 1940, Japanese diplomat Shiuni Sugihara issued transit visas to Jewish refugees. Sugihara was stationed in Lithuania to gather intelligence on German and Soviet troop movements. He witnessed Jewish families seeking escape from Nazi-occupied Europe and began writing visas for Jewish people to travel to Japan in order to seek further refuge in other countries. Sugihara was ordered by his superiors to not issue the visas, but he later stated, "I may have disobeyed my government, but if I didn't, I would be disobeying God." With his wife's support, Sugihara spent long hours issuing over 2,000 visas. Some articles credit him with saving 6,000 Jewish lives. Some of the visas, however, were never used, and recent research has revealed that the actual number of rescues cannot be substantiated. On occasion, single visas were used for entire households as well. In addition to the travel visas, Tokyo required travelers to have a final destination permit to be allowed to travel through Japan. Dutch consul Jan Svardendik, who was also stationed in Lithuania at the time, stamped thousands of Jewish passports to visa-free Dutch Curaçao. The fees for the refugees' transit across the Soviet Union was paid for by various Jewish organizations. Once the refugees arrived in Japan, they left for the United States, Australia, Canada, and other countries. Some were later imprisoned in Japanese-controlled Shanghai until the end of the war.
Frederic Remington created some of the most iconic Western art in the history of America. His art was able to bring the untamed frontier to the big city, and today is evocative of the Wild West. Remington not only drew and painted the West, he lived it as well, and he loved playing the role of pseudo-cowboy. His art is showcased at the Frederic Remington Museum of Art in Ogdensburg, New York, a town where he grew up and would spend time in his adulthood. Even though Remington didn't live in the house that became the museum, it is said that he haunts the place. And there is a legend connected to the house that also seems to have left behind a ghost story. Join us for the history and hauntings of the Frederic Remington Museum of Art.
Ogdensburg is located on the southern shore of the St. Lawrence River in New York. The Iroquois were some of the first indigenous people here, and they were followed by the 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee, which were the Mohawk, Onondaga, Oneida, Cayuga, and Seneca. The French were the first European settlers to establish a presence, and they built a mission named Fort de la Présentation. And I'm sure in French that would sound a lot different.
Présentation.
There you go.
No, I don't know.
In 1749. They named the colony New France. Parts of the French and Indian War would take place nearby, and after the British won, France ceded its land east of the Mississippi to Britain. The British renamed the fort to Fort Oswegatchie after their native allies. These allies would be driven out of the area after Britain lost the Revolutionary War by American settlers, and they renamed the village Ogdensburg after a landowner named Samuel Ogden in 1796. The village was incorporated in 1817 and became the city of Ogdensburg in 1868. The house that would become the Frederic Remington Museum of Art was built here in 1810, and Remington would begin living in Ogdensburg in 1872.
We should probably talk about Frederic Remington before we share about the museum created in his honor. First, a little fun fact. Yes, he was related to Eliphalet Remington, who had founded the oldest gunmaker in America, the Remington Arms Company, which made the Remington repeater rifle. And he was related to famous mountain man Jedediah Smith. Frederic was born in New York in 1861 to Union Army Colonel Seth Remington, who was off fighting in the Civil War for the first 4 years of Frederick's life. Before serving in the military, Seth had been a newspaper editor and postmaster, so after the war, he moved the family to Bloomington, Illinois, because he was appointed editor of the Bloomington Republican. In 1867, the Remingtons moved back to New York.
Seth had dreams of his son going to West Point, but that was never going to happen. Frederic wasn't a good student, and being that he was the creative type, he wasn't good at math. He loved the outdoors and was an excellent hunter and swimmer, and he was a good horseman. Frederic was also a very talented artist. He started sketching soldiers and cowboys when he was still quite young. His father moved the family to Ogdensburg when he was 11 so that he could attend the Vermont Episcopal Institute, which was a military school. Rather than push Frederic into a military future, Frederic got the opportunity to have a drawing lesson there, and he was hooked. So you can just imagine his dad's like, okay, I am going to get this kid ready for the military. We're going to a military school. And then he takes art class and is like, I love this. Transferring to another military school didn't do anything either to foster a desire for a military life. Frederic spent most of his time drawing caricatures of his classmates. He wrote his uncle, I never intend to do any great amount of labor. I've but one short life and do not aspire to wealth or fame and a degree which could only be obtained by an extraordinary effort on my part.
Oh boy.
I guess that's his wordy way of saying, I'm lazy and I ain't going to work for a living.
I want to do what I want to do.
So art it was, and Frederic went off to study art at Yale University. It's not like he went to a slacker school there.
No.
I mean, while there, he found the style that he would pursue. He loved action and drew men boxing and playing sports. Still life bored him, and he wasn't into classical art at all. His first published illustration was a cartoon of a, quote, bandaged football player, and it ran in Yale's school paper, the Yale Current. While Frederic was at school, his father contracted tuberculosis. As it got worse, Frederic decided to leave Yale, and he did that in 1879. His father died the following year. He was only 50. For a time after that, Remington drifted in life. He meandered through various jobs and proposed to a girlfriend, but her father rejected the offer, and you can see maybe why. He's just kind of, drifting. Frederic took his inheritance and headed for Montana with the intention of setting up a mining interest, and when he didn't have enough money for that, he thought about setting up a cattle operation. He still didn't have the capital for that. But something that would prove to be wonderful for the world of art happened. Remington sat and marinated in the West. He got to see the bison roaming the prairie. He observed the Native Americans of the plains. He witnessed confrontations between those tribes and the U.S. cavalry. There were the cowboys and the miners and the horses and unfenced cattle. Can you imagine a time when there was no fences for the cattle? They were just free roaming? Remington was getting an authentic taste of the American West of the 1880s, and he was going to share it with the world.
Remington's first commercially published piece was in Harper's Weekly. The money wasn't rolling in, though, so Frederic decided to try sheep ranching in Kansas. That proved to be boring. Story of his life.
Yes, everything is just boring.
So he sold the land that he had sunk his inheritance into, and he returned to New York to get some money from his mother, only to return to Kansas and lose money on a hardware business.
I can only imagine what his mother must be thinking. He runs off to the West, so he just kind of leaves her, basically loses all of his money and comes back home and goes, hey, Mom, can I have some more money? And then he loses that.
Then he tried being a partner in a saloon. In 1884, he went back to New York to fetch that young woman whom he had wanted to marry earlier. Her father was willing to let her marry Remington now, even though he seemed to be rudderless. So Remington made Eva Caton his wife and brought her back to Kansas. She wasn't thrilled with the saloon business. When Remington showed her his collection of sketches and revealed that drawing was his real interest, she packed her bags and headed back to Ogdensburg.
Yeah, I think she went, oh my God, this guy is a loser. What am I doing?
This caused Remington to get more serious about his art, and he started selling paintings. He realized he really could make money doing this, and he headed back to New York to reunite with Eva, and he went to the Art Students League of New York to refine his skills. Western themes were becoming really popular, so everything was about to sync perfectly for Remington. He was 25, and it was 1886 when Harper's Weekly gave him his first full-color front page. The magazine would send him on various assignments through the years.
In his first year of being a commercial artist, Remington made $1,200, and he told a friend, that's a pretty good break for an ex-cowpuncher to come to New York with $30 and catch on at art. Remington used various mediums in his work, and he tried to get the most accurate colors he could to depict what the West really looked like. In 1887, Remington met a man who would become a good friend of his, Theodore Roosevelt. You ever heard of that guy?
Maybe a time or two?
That sounds familiar. Roosevelt had just finished writing his book, Ranch Life and the Hunting Trail, and it was going to be serialized in the Century magazine, and he needed over 80 illustrations to accompany it. So he commissioned this young new artist named Remington. Roosevelt himself was only 29 at the time. The two men became fast friends as they realized that they both loved adventure and the West. The two would remain lifelong friends. As his skill grew, and let me just say on top of that, Theodore Roosevelt commissioned him for this, but he never, ever is going to buy a piece of Remington's work.
Oh, wow.
I can't. When I read that, I'm like, wait, he loved everything he did, but he never bought a piece? Wow. I wonder what Frederic thought of that. He's like, hey, some friend you are. You never bought any of my art. As his skill grew, Remington was able to take on more complex works, and in 1889, he won a second-class medal at the Paris Exposition. The following year, he held a one-man show, and it was at this time that he really put forward a public persona of being a cowboy and spoke like a cowboy and changed up his biography, throwing in a few myths of his escapades in the frontier. Harper's Weekly had him under a handshake agreement, and they really embraced the pseudo-cowboy thing, launching a promotional campaign to that effect. So they were all happy to make him a cowboy. And, I mean, he really did try to live the cowboy life. So I wouldn't say that he was lying necessarily, but he embellished it quite a bit.
In his personal life, Remington and his wife relocated to New Rochelle, New York, which would put them closer to New York City in 1890. It was the perfect spot because Remington could still enjoy open spaces and horseback riding, while still having the big city to facilitate his art with publishing houses and galleries. Remington tried to stay active because his success had led to indulgences that added quite a bit of girth to his frame, and he would struggle with it for the rest of his life. The house was located at 301 Webster Avenue on a hill known as Lathers Woods, named for Colonel Richard Lathers. Lathers built a few houses on his 300-acre estate as investments. One of these was bought by Remington. The house was designed in the Gothic Revival style by architect Alexander Jackson Davis, with great views of the countryside and Long Island Sound. Remington called the estate Endion, which was an Ojibwe word meaning the place where I live. The house had everything the couple needed or wanted except a studio for Frederic. He used the large attic for a while, but eventually retained New Rochelle architect O. William Deegan in 1896 to plan a studio addition to the house. Remington would describe the studio to a friend as being czar-sized.
Guess that means it was big?
Apparently. In this studio, he would create most of his life's work, which included over 3,000 pieces. The studio was filled with items he had collected, and he would dress models in genuine pieces for inspiration. The studio has been recreated at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming.
And I've been to Cody, Wyoming. It's a very cool city, and something that happens in the summer is that they have a rodeo every single night in the summer.
Goodness.
Blew me away. We did the whole state of Wyoming when I was a kid. So we went through the Grand Tetons and all the way up to Yellowstone and then over to Devil's Tower and then into Cody. And we were like getting ready to go over to our hotel and we saw all these banners about a rodeo. And we're like, oh, how cool. They have a rodeo going on right now. Let's go watch it. And so we went to watch it. And then that's when we realized, oh, they do this every single night here. It's pretty cool.
That's crazy.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. One of the famous moments in Western history that Remington documented in January of 1891, albeit after the fact, was the massacre at Wounded Knee. He went through the tents of the wounded soldiers and got their stories. They had all thought that this was going to be an easy surrender of Bigfoot and his warriors, but Bigfoot's group fought back by concealing guns under blankets that they threw off when the 7th Cavalry arrived. An interesting paranormal tangent to this is that the medicine man of the tribe had given the warriors ghost shirts, that's what he called them, and told them that no bullet would be able to wound them if they wore the shirts. And the warriors believed him. Obviously, that wasn't true, and Remington wrote, lying on his back with a bullet through the body, Lieutenant Mann grew stern when he got to the critical point in his story. I saw 3 or 4 young bucks drop their blankets, and I saw that they were armed. Be ready to fire, men, there's trouble. There was an instant, and then we heard sounds of firing in the center of the Indians. Fire, I shouted, and we poured it into them. Oh yes, man, but the trouble began when the old medicine man threw the dust in the air. That is the old Indian signal of defiance. And no sooner had he done that act than those bucks stripped and went into action. Just before that, someone told me that if we didn't stop that old man's talk, he would make trouble. He said that the white men's bullets would not go through the ghost shirts. Said another officer, the way those Sioux worked those Winchesters was beautiful, which criticism you can see was professional. Added another, one man was hit early in the firing, but he continued to pump his Winchester, but growing weaker and weaker and sinking down gradually, his shots went higher and higher until his last went straight up in the air. Those Indians were plumb crazy. Now, for instance, did you notice that before they fired, they raised their arms to heaven? That was devotional. Yes, Captain, but they got over their devotional mood after the shooting was over, remonstrated a cynic. When I passed over the field after the fight, one young warrior who was near to his death asked me to take him over to the medicine man's side that he might die with his knife in the old conjurer's heart. He had seen that the medicine was bad, and his faith in the ghost shirt had vanished. There was no doubt that every buck there thought that no bullet could touch him. So I found that interesting that this young Native American is dying, and his dying wish was, I want to go stab to death that medicine man who clearly lied to us about these shirts.
Right.
What Remington didn't cover was that possibly over 300 Native Americans, many of them women and children, were killed in the frenzied massacre. Many reports indicate that this all started with a deaf Lakota named Black Coyote being unwilling to give up his new Winchester rifle, and, as soldiers went for the gun, it went off. Whatever happened there, the result was that officers lost control of their soldiers, who fired relentlessly and hunted down the women and children who ran. Many of the unarmed Lakota grabbed stockpiles of guns that they had turned over and returned fire, killing and wounding soldiers. Casualties on the Native American side were far higher than on the military side. In 1990, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution expressing the government's deep regret for what happened at Wounded Knee.
Remington would be referred to as the soldier artist because of his extensive work with featuring soldiers and cavalrymen and their stories in his work. Frederic spent much of the 1890s traveling through Mexico and the U.S. He eventually made it to Florida, where he discovered Florida crackers, which were our version of cowboys. Remington wrote of his work, "My drawing is done entirely from memory. I never use a camera now. The interesting never occurs in nature as a whole, but in pieces. It's more what I leave out than what I add." Frederic definitely focused on the outside world of the West. Saloons and dance halls didn't really make it into his work, and he rarely depicted women. Most of the females he drew were Native American. In 1895, Remington started working on sculpting. He asked his friend, sculptor Frederic Ruxtel, to teach him how to sculpt, and his first armature and clay model featured a cowboy fighting to stay aboard a rearing, bucking bronco, with the stirrups swinging free, a quirt in one hand and a fistful of mane and reins in the other. He entitled it the Bronco Buster. It would be his most popular sculpture. He made $6,000 over 3 years on the piece.
Remington spent 7 days a week in his studio, but he was becoming bored as 1900 rolled around, and he longed for a war to get started so he could be a heroic war correspondent. Because as you've heard us talking about the artwork he's doing in these sketches, he's also writing. And that's something I really didn't know anything about Remington, that he also was a writer. And so when he was documenting all this stuff with his drawings, he was also writing about the stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, he's like, we need a war around here. I'm like,
He gets bored quite often, it seems like.
And maybe that's not why you wish for war. You really don't want to long for that. Frederic lived in this kind of illusionary world where war would be good because, as he told a friend, he had, quote, done nothing but potboil of late. Frederic had done a self-portrait of himself as a lean cowboy on horseback, but he was far from that, and it would prove his undoing. He weighed in at nearly 300 pounds. That year, he bought an island on the U.S. side of the St. Lawrence River that he could use as a summer residence and place to live Crusoe-like, although it had a substantial cottage and outbuilding. So I was like, he described it as a place where he could live like Robinson Crusoe, but I'm like, I'm pretty sure Robinson Crusoe didn't have a big fancy mansion and outbuildings.
Yeah, no.
He called it Inglenook and said of it that it was the, quote, finest place on earth. Remington also took to writing novels, but that wasn't as successful, so he focused mostly on sculpture and painting. And it was said that he came out with this Western novel that just really didn't take off at the same time that The Virginian came out. And of course, The Virginian exploded and became very popular. It's still popular today. And so you can only imagine he was like, dang it, I missed that one. In 1908, he decided to sell the house in New Rochelle, and before he did that, he built a bonfire in the front yard and burned dozens of his oil paintings that had been used for magazine illustration. Apparently, he did this as a statement that he was done with illustration for good.
Wow.
I am not going to illustrate. I'm just burning everything that ever went into that. I was like, wow, that's pretty drastic.
Kind of unfortunate.
And keep in mind where Remington is today in the art world. That was probably millions of dollars worth of art he just set on fire.
Easily. At the beginning of 1909, the Remingtons bought 45 acres in Richfield, Connecticut, and they built a home and studio there. Although the house still stands today and is a National Historic Landmark known as the Frederic Remington House, Frederic didn't live in it for very long. In December of 1909, Remington had to have an emergency appendectomy, and his extreme obesity led to complications and peritonitis, and he died on December 26, 1909. Eva would survive him by 9 years. The house where the Remington Museum is located was built in 1810, and as we said in the intro, Frederic never lived there. He probably was in the house, though, as his friend George Hall had owned the house. Frederic's wife Eva was definitely in the house. She lived there with her sister Emma as guests of Hall from 1915 to 1918, when Eva passed away. Most of the items in the museum came from Eva Remington's 1918 estate. These items include scrapbooks, photographs, Remington's library, his easel, his paintbrushes, his hockey stick, his elk's tooth cufflinks, and even the cigars that were in his pocket before he died. The museum opened in 1923 as the Remington Art Memorial. That name changed to its current name as the Frederic Remington Art Museum in 1981. There are claims that the museum is haunted, and there seem to be at least 2 ghosts here. Newspapers began reporting hauntings at the museum in the 1940s, according to museum director Laura Foster. Frederic Remington is one of those ghosts. His full-bodied apparition has been seen, and objects do move around as though he's back at work in his studio.
I find that fascinating because he never lived here, so clearly if his spirit is here, it's attached to his stuff. The other spirit is believed to belong to a woman named Elena Ameriga Vespucci. You might recognize the name Ameriga from a previous This Month in History when we talked about America being named for Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian explorer and navigator who called what would become the Americas the New World. Cartographer Martin Waldseemüller in 1507 wrote on a map of the New World the Latinized form of Amerigo, which was America, and later cartographers followed suit. I guess, because he kind of pointed out that this is what this is. He didn't necessarily discover it, but put his name on it. That's why we're called America today. Elena was a direct descendant of Amerigo. She also ended up the mistress of George Parrish because of a card game. This is a legendary story, meaning that some of it may just be lore, but regardless, Elena is a fascinating character. She was raised in a Florentine convent until the age of 17. Then she was told that she would be moving on to serve as maid of honor to the Grand Duchess of Tuscany, and she was having none of that. There was a secret group that had formed to obtain Italian independence called La Jeune Italie, and she ran away and joined that group. In 1832, she took up arms and was described as having great gallantry, and she suffered a severe injury at the hands of an Austrian dragoon. These political activities got her in trouble, and she was exiled to France, where she sought refuge at the court of France, meaning she got in good with the royal family there, maybe as a mistress.
When given the chance to head over to her family's namesake, she jumped and traveled to the United States, where she petitioned for citizenship and a land grant. Elena was beautiful and very charming, so it didn't take long for her to insert herself into the political circles of Washington, D.C., and she got Senator Thomas Hart Benton to petition the Senate on her behalf. And he said, "She is without a country, without fortune, and without protection. She asks that we grant her a corner of the land which bears the name of her glorious forebear, and for the right of citizenship among those who call themselves Americans." Congress was actually forbidden to do that, so nothing came of this.
The Countess of Blessington said of Elena that she was interesting and original, full of animation. She possesses a certain wild, unsteady energy and cleverness, tormented with a constant desire to excite attention. She was described as of fine features, symmetrically formed, of the perfect Italian style of beauty, with more of Juno's characteristics than of Venus's peculiarities in its excellency. Her figure was commanding, full, strongly set up, and finely molded. Her eyes were wonderfully brilliant, and her hair black as jet and of extraordinary length and abundance. With all of this in her favor, she decided to follow a suggestion made to her to go to the American people for help in starting her new life. So she visited several major cities in America, and it was written, "Her path was strewn with roses, open hands, and confiding hearts." Even though it seemed that Elena would become a national icon, she abruptly left in 1840 and sailed for Europe, declaring that she didn't want any money that wasn't a gift. This leads us to believe that perhaps she was told that money given to her was a loan or something, maybe? Maybe. Whatever the case, the New York Evening Star did not take this ingratitude lightly, and a bitter expose was written about Elena, and she was accused of having an affair with the Duke of Orleans.
Elena would return to America, though, and this time she claimed to be Contessa Helene America. She had landed in Boston and started working the social circles there, and no one seemed aware that she was Elena. They all fell under her spell once again. At some point, she met a wealthy German merchant named George Parrish. The two were living in what was described as immoral intimacy.
Or what did you say, Kelly?
Living in sin. In Ogdensburg, New York. And here is where we get our legend. How Parrish and Elena came to be together seems to be the result of a card game. Elena, as Contessa, had become the paramour of Martin Van Buren's playboy son, John. John liked to gamble, and he and Parrish got embroiled in an intense night of poker playing at the Luray Hotel in Evans Mills, New York. John wasn't having any luck, and he lost all his money, so he put Vespucci up as a bet and wagered ownership of her on a toss of his last gold coin. Parrish won the toss, and he got the girl.
You can imagine Elena's like, I'm sorry, I'm what? Ownership what? Now, we're not sure if this story's true because Parrish and Vespucci really seemed to love each other and spent 20 years together. That doesn't sound like somebody who was just won in a card game.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Unless she was like, he is kind of hot and has money, clearly. And then she was like, I'll stick around with him. You know, sometimes in arranged marriages, that's what would happen.
Does
they
work
would
out.
fall in love with each other.
Yeah.
Elena spent much of that time as a recluse because of all the wagging tongues about the two living in sin, as you put it, Kelly. The bliss would come to an end in 1856 when George's older brother died in Germany. His brother had been Baron von Leftenberg, and now his family needed him to assume the role and to find a bride. Elena wouldn't fit that bill, so he packed her up and sent her off to France with an allowance. The couple would never see each other again, and Vespucci was devastated. You can imagine she was very brokenhearted. She died in Paris in 1866. It was discovered by a man named C. Edwards Lester while he was researching a book on the explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, that Elena's family were living in genteel poverty and that her stories about being raised in a convent, her time at the court of the Grand Duchess, her role in the Italian resistance, her intimacy with the French royal family were all just made-up stories. She was actually a child that was hard to control, whom he wrote had been, quote, the mistress of some dozen men.
Oh, boy.
So we don't know how true that was. She certainly worked her way to the top in, using her womanly wiles, as they say. Now, how Elena gets connected to the museum is that Parrish and her had lived at this house for those 20 years. So the Frederic Remington Museum of Art is where they lived. This was the happiest time of her life, and that is why her spirit seems to have come back across the ocean. In 2015, a psychic named Frida Gladdell visited the museum and did a walkthrough with museum volunteer Donna Wright. Wright shared that she didn't believe any full-time spirits resided in the main museum, but she thought that she and Gladdell did encounter some residual energy. Although, it sounds intelligent to us. Because, Kelly, residual spirits don't respond to you or talk to you, right?
Correct.
They decided to communicate with the female spirit at the house, and they did seem to make a connection. When they asked if Elena had been won in a poker game, she responded very firmly, I was not won in a poker game. The spirit claimed that she had actually lost money during the poker game and then had to quit because she had no money left. So now it would seem, if we're to believe this medium and the spirit talking to her, that she was there at the poker game, but she was a player. And that perhaps that is how she met George Parrish, as they're both sitting at the same table gambling, and it's like, hey, you're kind of cute and blah, blah, blah. Now, what was interesting about this investigation is that it was dovetailed with a simultaneous Clarkson University study of the air quality. So you're probably going, wait, what? This medium is coming in to do a paranormal investigation and she brings a bunch of university students in to check the air? Several undergraduate students under the guidance of Shane Rogers, who was an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering, were investigating the claim that airborne organisms could provoke paranormal experiences.
Huh, interesting.
So now, Kelly, we have another arrow to put in our quiver of what could be causing paranormal experiences. I had to know more, as you know how I can be. So I go over to this website called labmanager.com, and this is an article written by Clarkson University back in March of 2015. And it says, undergrads research link between hauntings and indoor air quality. A team of Clarkson University researchers is studying the possible links between reported hauntings and indoor air quality. Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering Shane Rogers said human experiences reported in many hauntings are similar to mental or neurological symptoms reported by some individuals exposed to toxic molds. It is known that some fungi, such as rye ergot fungus, may cause severe psychosis in humans. The links between exposure to toxic indoor molds and psychological effects in people are not well established, however, Rogers said. Notably, many hauntings are associated with structures that are prime environments to harbor molds and other indoor air quality problems. Isn't that true, Kelly? I mean, a lot of these old jails and asylums, God only knows what the air is like in there.
True.
As we know, Zach Bagans runs around with a mask on most of the time now, and it's caused him to have all kinds of lung issues being in those places. And there was even that one female paranormal investigator a few years back who died after being exposed to some of the toxic molds and stuff in these places. Hauntings are very widely reported phenomenon that are not well researched, he said. They're often reported in older built structures that may also suffer poor air quality. Similarly, some people have reported depression, anxiety, and other effects from exposure to biological pollutants in indoor air. We're trying to determine whether some reported hauntings may be linked to specific pollutants found in that air. Rogers is working with a group of undergraduate students to measure air quality in several reportedly haunted places around the North Country, including the Frederic Remington Art Museum in Ogdensburg, New York. The team will gather data at several locations throughout the spring and summer and will publish their results at the end of the study. By comparing these samples to samples from places with no reported hauntings, the researchers hope to identify factors unique to the haunted locations. They are looking for commonalities in the mold microbiome in the places believed to be haunted compared to the controls, as well as analyzing the types of toxic molds that may cause psychological effects in humans. As a longtime fan of ghost stories, Rogers said his goal is not to debunk the legends, but to instead provide insight on why certain places are perceived to be haunted. What I do hope is that we can provide some real clues as to what may lead to some of these phenomenon and possibly help people in the process. So I thought that's kind of cool. He's an engineer and a scientist, and he's like, I'm not trying to poo-poo the ghost stories, just trying to figure out why they might be going on here. So I would love to know what the results were. I have not been able to find out what they came up with, but very fascinating.
Indeed. Frederic Remington lived a larger-than-life kind of life, and so it is no wonder that his spirit would continue on here on this plane of existence. Much of his belongings are located at the museum. Is it possible that he has returned to his belongings? And did Elena Ameriga Vespucci come back here as well? Is the Frederic Remington Museum of Art haunted?
That is for you to decide. Sounds like a cool place to check out anyway, just to see all of the stuff that he used to have.
Absolutely.
And I don't know much about the actual house. I tried to look up like what was inside the house. Has it been, taken back to an 1800s time? I'm not sure. But if you really want to get a feel for his studio, definitely have to check out the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody. And that makes me think that the home that he shared with Eva in Ogdensburg no longer exists. Because why would that not be turned into a museum? And
right.
they call the one that they owned in Connecticut the Frederic Remington House or whatever. And I'm like, he didn't even really live in it. He was in it for he wasn't even in it for a year.
Right.
We'd love to have you guys check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com or at any of our various social media. You can find us under History Goes Bump everywhere. I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We want to welcome into the cemetery Rhonda Baker. We're going to be burying you in a chest tomb.
Thank you so much for supporting History Goes Bump.
Want to keep the spooks away? Give us a review.
And their size certainly makes them odd. Tasty, but odd.
How do you know they're tasty?
Actually, I've never enjoyed one, so I don't know. I just like crab in general.
He witnessed Jewish families seeking escape from Nazi-occupied Europe and began writing visas for Jewish people to travel to Japan. That's what happens when I don't have enough air to finish the sentence. With his wife's support, Shugi! I'm going to call him Shugi.
Suge Knight.
Yeah, he's definitely not Suge Knight. He did some good stuff here.
A town where he grew up and would spend some time in his adulthood.
He started sketching shoulders. I don't know why. I cannot say.
He loves to sketch shoulders and how they attach, up to the neck and down to the arms.
Yes, shoulders can be so fascinating. So can soldiers. I don't know why I have a hard time saying that word. And if I have to put British in front of it, I know the listeners have heard that over and over again in bloopers.
And started
British
sketching soldiers. You're all about the alliteration in this episode. In his personal life, Remington and his wife relocated. In his personal life, Remington and his wife relocated. Why is it sounding weird coming out of my mouth?
Just try it one more time. Relocated, yes.
Remington tried to stay active because his success had led to indulgences that added quite a bit of girth to his fame. Oh, frame.
Quite a bit of girth to his fame. Does that just mean you're really, really, really famous?
And he and Parrish got embroiled in an